Today we start the big module of neurohumoral regulation, and today we'll talk more about the humoral factors and humoral regulation that can be applied to the regulation of the physiological functions of the organism. So the big module is called neurohumoral regulation. And today we talk more about the humoral factors. I ask you in the chat, please write to everyone, which humoral factors do you know that can influence some functions of the organs or the tissues? Please write in the chat the humoral factors that influence body functions.
Hormones.
Hormones, yes. Is there something else?
The humoral immunity factors.
Immune factors, yes. Do you know the examples of immune factors? Which immune factors can we talk about? Let's say it will be cytokines. Do you know what cytokine is?
White blood cells. White blood cells.
Cytokines are not the cells, but they are the factors that are produced by leukocytes, yes, by the white blood cells. Do you know the examples of cytokines? Interleukins and
Lymphokines. Lymphokines.
Lymphokines, yes. Tumor necrosis factor alpha, a good example of the cytokines. So interleukins could help you to tell what it is, cytokines, what is it? Inter means between, and leuko reminds you about the white blood cells. So these factors, the cytokines, are factors that help white blood cells to interact with each other. You know that immune factors are immune cells are very numerous. They are very different from each other. They should find, check, and kill the possibly dangerous factors, dangerous cells, bacterial cells, and save our own cells. So that means that they should interact very well. And interleukins help to interact. Tumor necrosis factor alpha is a good example. It is not only about the tumor immunity against tumors, but it is also involved in the regulation of some mental things, of the mood, of depression, and so on. So of the stress reactions, and so all the cytokines are involved not only in the immune factors, but in much more numerous things. So in general, when we talk about immune system or immune factors, we can also talk about the neuroimmune hormonal regulation. This is not a very common thing to discuss, neuroimmune hormonal regulation, but we also should remember that immune factors play a big role in the general regulation of the body functions. What else? What else can influence something? Let's talk first about the regulation in general. What does it mean, regulation? What is it in the organism, in our body? What does it mean, regulation?
A way to reach homeostasis.
Well, yes, it is in very big amount of situations. It is about homeostasis, yes. But the word regulation, it is not only to maintain something to be the same, but also, for example, growth. It is not homeostatic thing. Growth means something additional is added to the organism, like more cells are added. So it is in the situation of homeostasis, it is a bit different. But what is it, regulation? In general, regulation, yes, Ahmed?
Keeping a constant, like a stable environment for inside the body.
Well, yes, this is about homeostasis. Yes, that's true. But the word regulation is not only about homeostasis. It is also about the disturbances of homeostasis. Sometimes, for example, in pathology, regulation works wrong and the homeostasis is not maintained, but the regulation occurs still. So regulation is the influence that changes the function, the functional state of something, of the cell, of the organ, of the organism altogether. So regulation means something, some influence from one system to the other system, the influence. So what are the factors that may influence something in our body? We talk about hormones, and of course, during today's class, we'll talk a lot of, we'll discuss a lot of information about hormones, immune factors. Yes, but there are other things that can be involved in the regulation. What does it mean, humoral factors? Humor from the Greek. What does it mean? Humor. It means liquid, and humoral factors are the biologically active substances that can be dissolved in liquids. The most common liquid in our body, the cerebrospinal fluid, all the post-humoral regulation. And humoral factors are the substances, the chemicals that are dissociated or dissolved in these liquids. So immune factors, hormones, what else? Have you heard about metabolites? Metabolites, what is it? When the cell is alive, when it lives, it uses some oxygen, some glucose, some substances for the growth, and some substances are used and some substances are produced after that that are not already important for the cell, and the cell wants to remove this metabolites, the waste products of the chemical reactions. Metabolites. Can you give me some examples of metabolites? What is the waste product of the oxygenation of the glucose, for example? Glucose plus oxygen, what are the metabolites of it? Yeah, I cannot believe
Carbon
it.
dioxide.
Hmm?
Carbon dioxide.
Of course, that's the, oh, sorry. Yes? Glucose plus oxygen gives CO2 and water. So metabolite could be CO2, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, what do you think? We will discuss it on the next chapters of our course, but what do you think? Carbon dioxide, can it influence something in our body? Well, the answer is yes, of course, it may influence, and the spoiler for the next chapters of normal physiology is that carbon dioxide influences our breathing even more than oxygen. So we breathe because of this carbon dioxide primarily, not because of oxygen. Because oxygen, we have oxygen, we have more oxygen than we need for the future 10 seconds. But we inhale earlier than we lost all the oxygen. We breathe because of carbon dioxide. Okay, another metabolite could be the lactic acid. It is produced when the muscles are working. And can lactic acid influence something? Of course, yes.
It can cause, if it accumulates in large amounts in the muscle, it can cause muscle spasms or cause the muscle to stop completely.
Yes, and a bit earlier, physiologists told about the lactic acid to cause the pain after the physical exercises, about the pain that comes next day when you cannot get out of bed because your whole body is in pain. But right now, lactic acid is not, it is supposed that lactic acid is not involved in the pain after several hours of physical exercises. It is supposed that the pain is caused by the small inflammation and disruptions of actin and myosin in the muscles. But lactic acid, of course, is regulating. First of all, it regulates the blood flow through the muscle. When the muscle is working, it uses a lot of energy, and this energy should appear there. To get more energy, we need to get more oxygen and more glucose for getting ATP. So lactic acid can increase the amount of oxygen that comes. First of all, because it has H+. So talking about H+, we can also talk about the ions. Ions may influence functional activity of the organs, of the tissues. Let's put H+ here, proton is here. Which other ions did we discuss during the previous topics? Which ion was very interesting in the regulation?
Potassium, sodium.
Potassium,
Calcium.
sodium, right? This is about the functional activity of the membrane, but there is one ion that really regulates. It is not involved.
Calcium.
Calcium.
Calcium, yes, calcium. Don't forget about calcium. This calcium has very big regulational role in our body functions. Another things, eicosanoids. Do you know what this is? Prostaglandins and leukotrienes are other examples of eicosanoids. Do you know what the substrate is? Arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is a substrate for eicosanoids. Have you heard about arachidonic acid in biochemistry, probably?
No, Professor, we haven't taken it yet.
This is a fat acid that can be found in any cell you like, And if there are special enzymes to produce prostaglandins or prostacyclins or leukotrienes from the arachidonic acid, then eicosanoids can appear there. So this is not hormones because we don't have some special gland to produce eicosanoids. They can be produced in any cell which contains special enzymes. Arachidonic acid is a fat acid. It can be found, for example, in phospholipids on the membrane. Do you remember the structure of the membrane? So the middle area of the membrane has fatty acids, and one of them could be arachidonic acid. So any cell contains arachidonic acid in the phospholipids of the membrane. Eicosanoids, they may cause different things. The most interesting one is pain, also allergic reactions, and so on. So for example, menstrual pain during the first days of menstruation in women is supposed to be caused by the prostaglandin secretion near uterus. So eicosanoids have this functional role. Another thing which is also interesting for you is this. This is a NO, nitrogen oxide of nitrogen. This is the endothelial factor. It is produced by endothelial cells and causes vasodilation, vasorelaxation. What do you think, in which area of medicine is this endothelial factor involved? Which
sedation? Sedation?
No, it is, so another oxide of nitrogen is involved. This is nitrogen oxide 2. This is involved in regulation of the blood pressure. And you probably know the name of the drug which donates this factor and dilates vessels. Nitroglycerin. Have you heard about that?
Yes,
No.
but I think it's the same one that explodes. That
Yes. So the substance can be exploded, but it sometimes is used as a drug. So it is used when the cardiac problems occur. So in cardiology, NO is important for cardiology, for the blood pressure regulation, and some problems appear when there is a deficit of this factor. For example, endothelial dysfunction. You can later hear about that. Endothelial dysfunction means that endothelial cells have problems, and one of the problems could involve this deficit of the factor NO, and vasorelaxation does not occur, blood pressure increases, and this is a problem. Hypertony is a big problem of our today's life. So, okay, these are some examples of the humoral factors except hormones. So you see, we don't only have hormones, but we have a lot of other things. Don't forget about that. And now we switch to hormones more because they are more investigated. We know more about them, and hormones need our understanding, and a lot of questions on exam involve questions about the hormones. So first of all, let's talk about the life cycle of the hormone. No, let's first talk about the different ways of action of all the humoral factors. probably you know that the cell and another cell, which they can be divided by the blood vessel. So here they are far away from each other. This is a blood vessel. They don't have the contact between each other. And also there could be a situation when we have two cells with the interstitial tissue between them. When the cell is producing the biologically active substance to the blood, and then this substance should go through the blood to reach another cell on the distant, far away from the first cell, this type of regulation, this type of interaction is called endocrine. Endocrine means far away and through the blood. So to reach the other cell, this biologically active substance need to go to the blood directly. Do you see that there is no duct? It goes directly to the blood, endocrine. I will add here to the blood, and it is secreted. The hormone is secreted directly to the blood. Directly, there are no ducts at all. So no ducts, directly to the blood. This is called endocrine. But there is also a possible situation when the cell produces substance and it goes to the nearest cell. It doesn't need to go to the blood, but it influences the nearest cell through the interstitial tissue. How do we call this type of interaction? This is called paracrine. Paracrine through the interstitial tissue, interstitium. There is also another possible way. For example, it's possible for the cell to produce substance and to act on its own. So the cell produced some substance, and this substance, for example, decreased the activity of this cell. This type is called autocrine. Autocrine. For example, the product of metabolic reaction can decrease the level of metabolic rate on this cell. So the cell was working good, and now this metabolites decrease the functional activity of the cell that produced this substance. So we have endocrine way, paracrine to the nearest, to the neighboring cells, and autocrine, the substance influences the same cell that produced this substance. One more thing I want to add about the humoral factors, let's call it the seventh. This is Apud system. Apud system. Have you heard about Apud system on histology, for example? They should be telling you about that.
There are endocrine cells that they are in the, for example, gastrointestinal system or some places.
Mm-hmm.
They are not in one organ, they are separated, some cells that they are
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. They do not form any kind of gland. They are separated cells, primarily in the gastrointestinal tract, but they can be found in many areas. And the Apud means amine precursor uptake decarboxylation. So that means that these cells produce amines by decarboxylation of the precursors. So they produce biologically active substances. They are dissociated through the gastrointestinal tract. They can be also called enteric endocrine cells. Endocrine I will put in this like that. So they are not actually endocrine, but they are enteric endocrine cells producing amines. And sometimes physicians forget about these Apud cells, but you should not. You should not forget when you will go to the hospital. Sometimes from time to time you can see patients with so-called with problems with this Apud system. Which problems can you expect from Apud cells? When they are in the normal amount, so when there is a normal amount of them, that's no problem. But for example, we can increase the amount of Apud cells. Can you provide any ideas of when can we find more cells of Apud system? What could be the reason why do we have more Apud cells than is normally required? In general, not about Apud cells, but when do we have more cells than we want? And normally we would like to remove them as fast as possible without any.
When we have an infection?
Infection is not really about more cells, but the real problem.
Tumor?
Tumor.
Tumors?
Yeah. So here I will put it like that, like this. So-called apudoma, the tumor. Tumor may cause real problems because this tumor, apudoma, may be the amine secreting tumor, and as we have more cells producing amines, then we have more reaction of amines, and this action already will not be paracrine, for example, but it will also go to the blood and go through the blood to the other organs and influence them. So apudoma could be a real problem. And one more thing about apudoma, that it may be really small, but very active when we talk about amines. So the amine concentration in blood can be high, and physicians cannot see the source of these amines. So this patient can go from one physician to the other, trying to find what is the problem. And you cannot find apudoma just by chance. You cannot find it surprisingly. You should search for apudoma to find it. That's why you should know about Apud system. And so apudoma cannot be found using ultrasound, for example, because it is too small. Apudoma may not be found using colonoscopy. It is too small. That's why you should find it directly, and you should remember that. It is a very rare case of patient's problem, but you can see these patients and you should know where to find, at least to
So
try.
we need a biopsy. We need a biopsy to find it.
We need, first of all, the visualization with the high quality, for example, MRI. And you should not just look through the MRI like this. Oh no, it's okay. It's okay. You should really look close to the gastrointestinal tract. Biopsy you can perform only when you know the place where to apply biopsy, where to get the substrate, because it is very small. So actually this amine secreting tumor could cause real problems. Okay, let's now switch to the hormones. Do you have any questions? Okay,
No.
Let's switch to the hormones. These are just examples for you not to forget about other cells, other substances that can also regulate Okay, hormones. First of all, we should talk about the hormonal classification according to the structure. Classification. We have 3 types of hormones. The first one are proteins or peptides. Do you know the difference?
Peptides has less amino acids, but
Mhm.
proteins they have more amino acids in their
Yes,
Prime.
it's true. So the difference is really simple. Peptides are smaller than proteins. It is like peptides are smaller than 100 amino acids, and proteins have more than 100 amino acids in their amino acid chain. The second one is derivatives of amino acids. So they are not peptides already, but they are the amino acids transformed to another way, to another chemical way. And the third one is, what do you think? What do we need to add here? Steroids. Steroids. And now I want you to talk to me and to your, I will call your name and you will have to tell me the example of the endocrine gland. And the next person I call will tell me the example of the hormone. So Aziz Gapsi, could you tell me the example of endocrine gland?
Pineal
Pineal gland.
pineal gland.
Pineal gland. Okay, Al-Musawi Muhammad, could you give me example of the hormone which is produced in the pineal gland? Al-Musawi, could you give me the name of the pineal gland hormone? Lifa Nkosi, do you know what is the hormone of the pineal gland? Lifa. Are you here, Lifa? Sepideh. Sepideh. Could you tell me which hormone is produced? Sepideh.
Professor, can I answer?
Well, I see that you and Mariam are working on the class during the class, and I would like to hear other people. Now I don't
okay.
hear that.
I wrote you in the chat. Do you want me to answer?
Okay. This answer is not correct. This is not what you wrote is not the hormone. Sepideh Mohammadian, are you here?
Sorry, it's melatonin.
Yes, Yaver, you're right. This is melatonin. Okay, Kawa Hinren, I'm sorry. Zhao Hin.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you give another example of the endocrine gland? Another example of endocrine gland. Well, I
Pituitary
think
gland,
Hmm?
adrenal gland,
adrenal gland, okay. And Gao Lin Wei, what is produced in adrenal glands?
Cortisol.
Cortisol, okay. David, do you know what the other hormone which is produced in adrenal glands? Well, okay, this is quite long. Let's switch to the previous kind of discussion. So I see that some of you are not here. Probably some of you are not interacting. So that's a pity for me. I would really like to have the interaction with you. So, okay, now let's work in the chat. The examples of proteins, of the hormones with protein structure.
Do you
Could
want
you
me to?
write in the chat protein hormones?
Erythropoietin maybe.
Erythropoietin. Well,
Yes.
erythropoietin, yes, it has a protein structure. We cannot be sure that this is a hormone, but this is not a kind of traditional hormone. But yes, that's right. Insulin, yes.
ADH.
Yavar Mustafa, you wrote the wrong example. These hormones are not protein.
Growth hormone.
Growth hormone, yes.
Reproductive hormones.
Bar's hormone.
Reproductive, are they peptides or not? Follicular stimulating hormone, yes.
Professor, glycogen. Glycogen.
Glycogen, yeah, yes, glycogen too. But not glycogen, but what? Glycogen is another thing. Not glycogen, but what? It is also starting with gl, but the other part is different. Yes, Yaver, you're right. Glucagon. Glucagon, not glycogen, but glucagon.
Is immunoglobulins among them?
No, we don't call immunoglobulins as hormones. They are not hormones. They are immune factors. Derivatives of amino acids. They can be also divided in two. Some of them are catecholamines. What are they, catecholamines? Which two hormones are catecholamines? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, or another name of epinephrine is adrenaline. And the other part is the thyroid hormones. What are they?
Thyroxine.
Thyroxine.
T3, T4.
T3 and T4. On exam, you should not write tell T3 and T4. You should tell 3-iodthyronine or 4-tetraiodthyronine or thyroxine. I will write here T3 and T4, but please know, you should know the correct names, their proper names. And also ADH and FSH, don't call them this way. Give the whole name. For example, ADH, what does it mean? Antidiuretic hormone. So you should give the correct big names. Calcitonin is not involved in this structural.
Testosterone. What about testosterone?
Calcitonin, let's put it here, calcitonin. This is another hormone. It has another structure. So T3 and T4 are derivatives from tyrosine. They are produced from amino acid tyrosine. And only these two from the thyroid gland are involved as derivatives of amino acid. Steroid hormones. Steroid hormones, what are they?
Androgens. Androgens.
Androgens, so the sex hormone androgens.
Estrogens. Progestrogens.
Progesterone.
Glucocorticoid.
And mineral glucocorticoid.
What is the example of glucocorticoids? What is the main hormone?
Acometosin.
Cortisol. Cortisol. And mineralocorticoid. What is the example of mineralocorticoids?
Fluorocorticoid.
Aldosterone. I didn't hear properly. Aldosterone.
Doctor, there's a student that is waiting for you to let him in. His name is Muhammad Al-Denhani.
I don't hear him in the participants. He should try to enter once more.
He's waiting for you to let him in.
Ah, yes, I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now I see. Okay, so this classification is very important for us. First of all, because we can also talk about the structure and about the properties of these hormones. First of all, this first two, proteins and catecholamines, they have a very important property. They are hydrophilic. So they like water. They are not afraid of water. And thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, and steroids, they are hydrophobic. They are afraid. They are afraid of water. So they do not like to swim in the blood. They need what for the transport in the blood? What do they need? They need transport proteins. They need transport proteins for blood transport. It is like when a person doesn't like to swim, but he has to go somewhere using the river. You can ask him, you can offer him to use the boat or the ship instead of swimming in the water if he is afraid. That's the same with the steroid and thyroid hormones. They're hydrophobic and they need transport proteins because they do not like water. They like lipids, so they are lipophilic. That gives them the possibility to go through the membrane. Well, let's put it here. They can go through the membrane. But they do not like to swim in the blood. That's why they need proteins, special proteins for the transport. Hydrophilic, they like water. They can swim easily to reach their cell with the cell they want to interact, but they cannot go through the membrane. And another thing we will write right now here is that these hydrophobic hormones have intracellular receptors, and hydrophilic have membrane receptors. And now I offer you a break time, 15 minutes. 15 minutes break, and then we'll continue discussion of receptors.
Okay, Professor.
So we continue our class.
Okay.
And now we should discuss receptors. First of all, let's talk about the life cycle of the hormone. A life cycle of the hormone includes, where does the life cycle of the hormone start?
In the glands.
Yes, sure, in the gland. It should be produced in the gland to start its life cycle. So this is the blood vessel and the and the cell. So this is the gland, and the gland, endocrine gland. And the first thing is the secretion. So first of all, it should be secreted. It should be produced, production and secretion to the blood. So first of all, production. If it is a peptide hormone, it needs DNA, transcription and translation processes to create amino acid chain, and then it can be transformed to the protein, to the hormone with its shape, which is required for the beta work. And then when this protein is ready, it can be removed from the cell directly to the blood secretion. Let's say second, secretion is second. So this is second. Secretion to the blood vessels directly. When we talk about secretion and the endocrine glands, we talk that there are no ducts in the endocrine glands, and that means that each cell producing hormone needs to have the access to the blood vessels. It's very important for the anatomical structure of the glands because they have a lot of small vessels, a lot of capillaries in the glands. That's important for surgery on the gland because it may cause a lot of bleeding from the gland because of this high amount of vessels. The high vascularization is required for endocrine gland to get the access for each hormone producing cell to get directly to the blood, to be secreted directly to the blood. The third thing is transport. Transport through the blood. As we discussed before the break, transport could be just swimming of the hormone. For example, proteins can swim easily. They are hydrophilic. And some hormones don't like swimming. They need special transport proteins. The third thing is interaction. Interaction between the hormone of the hormone and of the effective organ. Effector cell. Interaction includes reception. So it needs receptors to have this interaction, to have this action of hormone on the cell. And the fifth thing is inactivation. Inactivation of hormone and removing it from the body. Inactivation could happen in different ways. What can you say about inactivation? What could you suggest? How is it possible to inactivate hormone? Is it possible to inactivate hormone?
Yes.
I think yes.
Of course, inactivation is possible and it is very important to inactivate. So what are the ways of inactivation?
Enzymes, maybe?
Yeah, so
Using enzymes?
enzymes may just break them down. Yeah, so these enzymes can be both intracellular. For example, hormone was working in the effector cell, and it was broken down by the lysosomic receptors, lysosomic receptors or lysosomic enzymes of this cell. This is possible, yes. What else? It also can be inactivated and be removed from the body through urine in kidneys and also
The liver.
the liver. Yeah, sure. So let's just shortly discuss where the problems could be. First of all, production. For endocrinologists, is it possible for a person to have problems with production of the hormone?
Yes.
Sure, it is possible. And what could be the problems? What type of the problems could arise in production?
Maybe lack of some resource for producing them in body, for example.
Well, the lack of endocrine gland itself, so it can be removed, it can be damaged, it can be not good enough as the child is born, for example. So it can be very small amount of endocrine cells, so the production can be low. Or what is the other problem with production? So the endocrine gland can just not be there, yes? What other problem of the source of hormone could be? Is it possible that a person has some mutation in the DNA? And for example, protein hormone is not, peptide hormone is not the same as it should be. It has some small difference from the normal hormone, and the activity of this hormone is getting lower than the normal activity.
So you're saying, Professor, that the reason could be genetic?
Yes. So it can be genetic mutations in the DNA. So they can be just not produced because of the endocrine gland problem or because of the DNA problem. So these are the problems with productions. With secretion, so going from the endocrine cell to the blood, normally there is not so many things that can go wrong. Only when the problem with vessels could be like the endocrine gland is not capillarized well, then the amount of the active hormone could be less. Transport. We should talk more about transport because it really has a lot of applications in the medicine. So we discussed with you that hydrophilic hormones are transported easily through the blood, but for the hydrophobic, we need transport proteins. Where do we get transport proteins? Where is the place of production?
Ribosome.
Hmm?
Ribosome. Yes, they are proteins.
Could you repeat, please? I didn't hear.
Ribosome.
Ribosomes, yes, but I ask you now about organs, not about the cell structures in the cell, but the organ in the body. In the body, what is the source of many, many proteins? Like the peptide synthesizing area in our body. A lot of proteins, including transport proteins for hormones, are produced there. Also, the proteins for the blood clotting are also produced there.
The liver?
Yes, sure, in the liver. Don't forget the liver. So without the good liver, the hormones may not work properly. For example, sex hormones, steroids, they cannot work properly without the good liver. So probably the patient has problems with endocrine symptoms, but the reason is not endocrine, but the problem is his liver cirrhosis, and he needs to go to the hepatologist and, for example, try to get a new liver. So what happens with the liver cirrhosis occur? Liver cirrhosis is the situation when the normal liver cells, hepatocytes, are not working, but they are removed by the connective tissue. So what happens with transport systems, with transport proteins?
If by liver cirrhosis, when liver cirrhosis happens, then there is less transport proteins, then there is less hormones in our blood, then we have hormone problems, I think.
Well, the first thing is correct. So we have less proteins, less transport proteins. The transport is worse, but we don't have less enzyme. We don't have less hormones. The amount of hormones depends on the production, the amount of hormones. But the problem is that the transport, the third phase, is bad, is not working properly. That's why, for example, in the man with the liver cirrhosis, it can happen that his androgens cannot be transported well, and they stay for a longer time in the tissues. In this case, the tissue enzyme called aromatase can change the structure of the androgen and convert it to the estrogen. And then this person has the estrogenic side effects of this high amount of estrogens because his androgens cannot travel normally. And also liver problems can also lead to these problems with inactivation. Liver problems can also cause less amount of steroid hormones inactivated in the liver and go into the bile. That's why, for example, liver cirrhosis can be accompanied by the gynecomastia. Gynecomastia is the situation when a man has increased volume of the breast than it should be in a man. Gynecomastia. So the problem is the liver and not the androgens or estrogens. Big amount of estrogens, but because of the liver. Okay, and the fourth step, interactions interactions with the effector cell is due to receptors. And of course, we can see problems with receptors, and now we will switch to the reception. In general, we can divide receptors to two types. These are membrane receptor, and another one is what? Membrane, and another one is intracellular. Intracellular, and membrane receptors can also be divided into two types. The first one is ionotropic, and another one is metabotropic. Ionotropic and metabotropic receptors. Intracellular are just intracellular. They can be divided into intracytosolic and intranuclear, but this is not of big importance. So ionotropic, these receptors, this type of receptors we have already discussed with you. Now I will ask you where. So this is a membrane, this is a receptor, and receptor is connected to the ion channel, for, let's say, sodium, potassium, calcium, or whatever. And when ligand or hormone or neuromediator or something is interacting with receptor, ion channel opens. Ion channel opens when this ionotropic receptor is activated. Where, in which topic did we discuss this thing? On the membrane, ion channel opens because of the interaction with receptor.
Action potential.
In which area directly? We discussed ion channels opened in the action potential, but there was no ligand or receptor, chemosensitive receptor.
And synapses?
Yes, synapses, yes. Synapses, yes. So ion channels, and here we have the example of the synaptic transduction. So we will not spend a lot of time here. Metabotropic receptor. We have membrane, we have receptor, and this receptor also is waiting for the ligand, but it is connected to another protein, which is called G-peptide. It can be different types of G-peptides, G-stimulating and G-inhibitory. I will just write here G-peptide, and G-peptide can also be accompanied by the special other peptide, which is called adenylate cyclase. These are just examples. We have some different examples of another proteins, adenylate cyclase. But this is one of the most common things: receptor, G-peptide, and adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase will produce cycloadenosine monophosphate from the ATP. From the ATP, adenylate cyclase produces cycloadenosine monophosphate, which is called the secondary messenger. Secondary messenger. And then cyclo-IMF can activates protein kinase. Do you know what protein kinases do? Kinase, what does it mean, kinase?
Phosphorylation?
The movement of proteins through membranes?
No, Mariam was right. This is a adding of the phosphate to the peptides. So for example, we had a peptide enzyme. And then protein kinase, when it is active, it activated the adding of the phosphate. So this is, the structure is mostly the same, but we have additional phosphate here. Phosphate. And now this enzyme is active. Active enzyme. So it becomes active because of the adding of the phosphate. And then this active enzyme can also change the shape of another enzymes or another proteins. And then this whole thing cause the metabolic change in metabolic activity. Change in metabolic reactions of the cell. And this is primarily in the cytosol. In cytosol, in cytoplasm. So it means like the switching on, switching off. We switch on secondary messenger cycle AMP, then it activates protein kinase, then it activates enzyme, and this enzyme is further activates another enzyme. So this is a cascade of the metabolic reactions, but all the things were prepared. So this is quite fast, and all the things can be switched off later. So it switches on, then it switches off. So this regulation is fast, and the change in the activity of the cell can be not very long. So the example of it is like when someone is ringing in your door, you come out, and there is a letter for you. So this letter is here. You read it directly here. You don't invite the person who brought the letter to you. You don't invite him to your house. You just read it here. For example, it's written that you should wait guests in half an hour. They will come. So you go back. You don't need this letter anymore. You already got the idea. You go into your house here, and then you change the activity of some areas. For example, you switch off TV, you switch on the light in your kitchen, you switch on water, you get some water, so you change the activity in the kitchen and you switch off the activity in the room. Everything is prepared. You don't do something special, but you prepare for the guests to come. So this is a kind of example of metabotropic reception. Intracellular reception. Do you have any questions about membrane receptors right now?
Professor, about the CAMP, the secondary messenger, what's its function?
It activates protein kinase.
Oh, okay.
So this is the substance for transduction of this activation by the enzyme, and it leads for the further processes of change of the processes in the cell. So that's why it is called secondary messenger. It transduces the signal to the cytosol. Intracellular. Intracellular means that the receptor is located intracellular, let's say like this. It is in the cytosol or in the nucleus, and it is waiting for the hormone to come. Which hormones will have intracellular reception?
Steroid hormones?
Steroid hormones and thyroxine. So they will enter the cell because it is very easy for them to go in. They are lipophilic. Then they interact with receptor. So this is, let's say, steroid hormone. And this is the receptor. They interact, they bind together, and together they go to the nucleus. In the nucleus, DNA is located. In the nucleus, DNA is located. So this hormone receptor complex may go in and influence the process of gene expression. Gene expression. Let's say it activates transcription of some genes. Activation of transcription will lead to the formation of what? When transcription is activated, then what happens? What is produced by the process of transcription?
Protein?
Not by transcription. Further, it will be the protein, which is created by transcription on the base of DNA.
RNA.
mRNA. mRNA is produced, then it goes to cytosol, then it finds its ribosomes, it finds endoplasmic reticulum, and so on. The translation process occurs, and then new protein is synthesized. So new protein means new properties. When a cell creates new protein, this new protein may give new features to the cell. The cell may become sensitive to some other substances. Let's say we get a new protein, which is the receptor for some other things. Then this receptor may be incorporated in the membrane, and the cell becomes active, becomes sensitive to some other biologically active substance. Or this protein may be structural protein, and it may add some properties to the cell membrane or to some functional activity. Or probably this protein is the enzyme, and this enzyme may produce something in the cell. So again, the cell is changed, and this happens longer. It needs some time for all these processes to get to the nucleus, to activate DNA, activate transcription, then the process of translation and post-translational changes of the amino acid chain. All these things require time. That's why this answer is longer. And this answer of the cell is much more profound than the previous one. So this looks like someone is entering your house without even asking you, just come through the wall of your house and says, oh, let's build you another room, or the second floor or the fifth floor, and let's build here another stairs, and let's build here some other things. So it changes your house completely. That's why it requires I forgot how to write this word. Okay, it requires the very special regulation by the central nervous system. So it is regulated by the CNS. So these are steroid hormones and thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Any questions about that? So these are the approximate 3 types of receptors, but of course we have more. For example, we have receptors metabotropic, but the receptor has enzymatic activity. But this is so this classification is enough for you to pass. Okay, if you don't have any questions about that, let's switch to this CNS regulation. What does it mean that the endocrine gland is regulated by the central nervous system? Which areas of the central nervous system are involved in the regulation? Do you know? So I wrote to use 2 areas in the brain which influence the work of these 3 areas. First of all, thyroid gland. So this is called pituitary dependent gland. Pituitary dependent glands. Which are what? First of all, thyroid. What's next? Which glands are pituitary dependent? Which glands produce hydrophobic hormones? Which glands produce sex hormones?
The testicular and ovaries.
أحمد خلاص اسكت.
So we can call them gonads or testes and ovaries. Oh, sorry. Gonads. And the third one is what? Cortisol. Where is cortisol produced?
Adrenal gland.
Adrenals, right. Adrenal glands or adrenals. But we don't talk about the whole adrenal glands. They are too big. They have some special areas. We should specify which area of adrenals is involved. Adrenals, but which area? So let's draw adrenals. Adrenals, like the pyramid, they have what? They have cortical area and they have what?
Medulla.
Medulla. Which hormones are produced from medulla? Medulla.
Steroid hormones.
No. Adrenaline and noradrenaline. Cortical area is divided into 3 areas. So this is a mnemonic rule, how to remember how they are called. So this is how do we call this area? So they look like clouds in the sky. This is the rain. This is the rain. Falling on the ground. So these are 3 areas. What are their names? Okay, this will be your task for the next time. Adrenals. But here we should mention that adrenals, only cortisol is influenced by the pituitary gland. Cortisol is the most vulnerable for the pituitary gland regulation hormone of adrenals, not the whole adrenals, only the cortical area from cortical area, from cortex. So other glands are not pituitary dependent. For example, okay, which examples of pituitary independent glands can you tell? Pituitary independent glands.
Parathyroid, for example. Parathyroid glands, for example.
What else?
Thyroid gland.
It is here, it is dependent. And now I ask you about independent. Pituitary independent. Examples of pituitary independent glands. Okay, medulla of adrenals is pituitary independent. Pancreas, parathyroid, so these are examples of pituitary independent glands. And now we switch to hypothalamus and pituitary directly. This is hypothalamus pituitary system. Hypothalamus and pituitary gland forms a special system. They interact with each other, and pituitary gland produces special hormones that influence other glands, other endocrine glands. So when you draw the system, you should draw hypothalamus and pituitary gland. I draw it like this: hypothalamus and pituitary gland. And then we can also draw the endocrine gland. Endocrine gland and the effector hormone, or just hormone of the gland. So here will be some endocrine gland, and here we'll write which hormone is produced by this endocrine gland. So hypothalamus produces special hormones that activate pituitary gland. Then pituitary gland produces tropic hormones that activate endocrine gland. One of the glands that we discussed on the previous slide, either thyroid gland or cortex of adrenals or testes or ovaries. So pituitary gland produces tropic factors or tropic hormones, hypothalamus produces releasing factors. Releasing factors activate pituitary gland to produce tropic factors. Tropic factors increase the activity of endocrine gland, and the amount of the hormone increases. But for this system to work, I forgot something very important, because hypothalamus and pituitary gland should regulate. They do not just increase amount of hormone, but they regulate. They know what they want to have, which amount of hormone is good enough for the body, and they want to regulate so that the amount of hormone would be good for the person in this environment, in this health, in this state. What did I forget to draw here?
Feedback.
Feedback. Yes, feedback. That's true. Feedback. The amount of hormones should be somehow analyzed by hypothalamus. It should be somehow analyzed, and this thing is called negative feedback. Negative, not because hormone says that hormone doesn't like hypothalamus. Negative is not about negativity or negative emotions. Negative means that this feedback allows us to maintain homeostasis, which we discussed, some of you told at the beginning. Negative feedback is good for maintaining level of hormone. Could you repeat, please? To maintain the level of hormones, not high enough and not very low. So in the middle somewhere where the hormonal action is good. And without this feedback, it is very difficult for hypothalamus to work properly. Negative. Why is it negative? When hormone gets high, hypothalamus stops activation of pituitary gland. When the level of hormone is too high, then it is not needed to increase the hormone production by the endocrine gland anymore. It is too much already. Then increased amount of hormone causes decrease in hypothalamic releasing factor. When the hormone amount is very low, then this means that hypothalamus should activate pituitary gland, and pituitary gland should activate endocrine gland. So the negative feedback works in opposite. When the level is too low, it should activate. When it is too high, it should decrease. So it is negative in opposite. It works in opposite to the hormone, to the level of hormone. And when the level of hormone is normal, then this activity is maintained for some time.